Okay, as promised, here is part 3 of my ultimate computer desk video. The first thing I want to do is show you exactly how I built it. First, I drew out the pieces on wood with a Sharpie, and then I used a jigsaw to cut out the pieces. I put the pieces together with these L brackets. These brackets are bolted in place using special nuts called T-nuts. I used a special drill bit to recess these nuts so that they would be flush with the wood. So you can kind of see how all this works here. I also measured out where all the plugs on the wall would go, such as the power and network, and cut holes to line up with those. Then I brought the pieces inside to test fit against the wall. You can see here where I have just about all the pieces assembled in the garage. This was my first chance to actually sit at the desk and see how it was going to feel. I applied a coat of primer and then painted it. After painting, I began to move the pieces into my computer room to assemble them. I found these really nice power strips that are easy to wall mount, plus the sockets are turned 90 degrees, which I really liked, so I mounted 3 of them under the desk. Next, I used masking tape to mark out where I wanted my cable management mounts to go. I spaced them about 6 inches apart all the way around the desk, and then I screwed them in place so they wouldn't fall off. If you're not familiar with these, they're designed for zip ties to go through so you can attach almost anything. This will help keep any cables off of the floor. Next, I got to work on those 3 triangular shelves. I decided to use these little brackets on the underside to screw them into place. I played around with different heights to see what I liked, and here's where I eventually put them. So when I added the 3 hidden shelves, one of the things I noticed is that it made the desk suddenly a lot stronger. Not that it was particularly weak before, but I noticed when I tried to jiggle it that it added a lot of stability. So I got to thinking about it. I'm like, well, why don't I just add a few more? So I decided to put 2 small shelves at each end of the desk like this. I had enough scrap material left over to make these easily. So it actually worked out really well, and it made the desk even stronger, and I also have more places to store things. Okay, so then it was time to start putting on the VCT tile. The first thing I needed to do was cut small strips to go on the edge of the desk. I actually ended up not getting the deep blue color as I ordered because they called back and said it was out of stock. So I got this lighter colored blue-gray color instead. The first thing to do was to glue the strips onto the edges of the desk and then file them down so that they were flush with the wood. I used Google SketchUp to play around with the tile placement. I tried 2 different patterns. This was to help me determine which pattern would work best. I decided to go eventually with the diagonal pattern. I went ahead and cut out all of the pieces to the correct shape. Then it was time to glue them all down, which ended up being a much messier job than I expected. I used a file and sandpaper to smooth the edges just like I had done on my shelves. Once all of the tile was done, I used a hole saw to drill 3 holes and then put in some cable management grommets, which later I glued in place. And here's what the finished edges look like. The last thing to do was to go back with a small paintbrush and touch up some of the spots that I missed. Finally, it was time to actually clean the top of the desk, and then I could start setting up my primary computer. The setup is very clean and efficient design, as you can see, and here's what it looks like underneath. As promised, I ran up all of the costs, and here's what I came up with. I spent $152 on wood and $120 on hardware like bolts and brackets and nuts and stuff like that. And then I spent $60 on paint and paint supplies, and $58 for the VCT tile, and $42 for those 3 power strips, $25 on various glues, and $25 on the cable management hardware, and $10 for some extra tools, mostly that special drill bit that I needed, which comes to a grand total of $492. Okay, so in retrospect, what do I have to say about the construction? Well, first of all, it took me an entire month to build this thing. And when I think back about some of the reasons it took so long is one thing, I was battling the Texas summer. I decided to build this in my garage in the month of August in Texas, and so that slowed me down a whole lot. Also, if I had had a router, it would have probably saved me 2 or 3 days trimming and filing the edges around the desk on the tile. instead of using a hand file. But I was over budget, so I didn't want to spend the money on a router, but that would have shaved off a couple of days. And so I would say if I were to do this project again, and I did it during the cooler part of the month, and I had all the right tools, I could probably do it in less than a week. Okay, so the other thing I want to say is I wish I'd used thicker wood. I used 1/4" MDF and particle board for everything, and it's decently strong, at least for anything I'm going to be doing with it. But when I sit on the desk, it does bow in just a little bit more than I think it probably ought to. So I kind of wish I'd used maybe a little bit thicker wood. If I decide that it's ever a problem, I can remedy it just simply by adding some supports. I've actually even drawn up some diagrams of what I may eventually put under there if I think it is a problem. And then I'll strengthen it up a lot. Also, I debated between using paint or vinyl on the outside of the sides of the desk. And I really wanted to experiment with the vinyl, but I would have had to buy a whole roll, and I really just wanted a little bit to experiment with, and so I decided just to go ahead and go the paint route because I'd already spent too much time on this project. But if I build anything like this in the future, I may experiment with using vinyl instead of paint. Okay, so what's next on the horizon? When it cools down, I might actually go ahead and build a smaller companion desk to go with this. As you can see kind of here in the diagram what it would look like. And this would be for my daughter, and it would be built under the same design as the big one I just built. It would just be smaller, and but otherwise look very similar. Yeah, so one of the other things I was considering doing was using some under cabinet lights so that when I'm down there on my hands and knees messing with cables and stuff, it'd be easier to see because it's actually pretty dark under there. But again, it was over budget, so I decided not to do that because that would add another $50 or $60 to the project. But I may yet do that at some point down the line. Depends on how much time I end up spending under that desk messing around with cables. Anyway, so that about wraps it up, and I hope you enjoyed my video, and I've got some neat stuff coming down the line, so I'll catch you next time.